Aloha, everyone. I'm Felicia Miller Johnson, and welcome to another episode of All Intuitive Conversation. I am happy to connect with Branch Isole, who is also in the same state that I am, and that is a first. So, help me to welcome to the stage, Branch. Aloha, Branch.
Aloha, Felicia. How are you today?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm well, also. Thank you.
Yes. So, I saw on a post that you had on LinkedIn that you are in the same state that I am located, which is Arkansas. So I do believe that is a first. So welcome. So tell me, are you from Arkansas?
No, not originally. This is where we ended up when my wife retired, and we love it. I used to travel this area for business, and so I was familiar with its natural beauty, and it was a great place for us to finally settle down. So we've enjoyed all of the years that we've been here.
Well, it is the natural state. So there are lots of different things we do the nature. Do you enjoy nature?
I do. I live down the road from you, but I live in the forest. So we have lots of critters and lots of natural visitors. And we really enjoyed, this rural lifestyle. My wife and I originally both spent much of our corporate lives, in the big city. And so it's very different from those days and much needed and welcomed respite.
Okay. So tell me about the big city. Where was that?
Oh, well, my wife was in Phoenix. I was in Los Angeles.
Oh, big
We
city, big
actually
city.
met. We actually met in Hawaii, and we lived in Hawaii for 12 years. So that was the big downturn from the city to the rural life.
The downturn. Hawaii is a downturn. That's cute. Okay, so before you came to Arkansas, like I said, you were working in Los Angeles. So tell me a little bit about your career and the trajectory that it went on.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm a child of the 50s and 60s. My family was military, so we traveled quite a bit, got a lot of exposure to different cultures, and different people.
Yes.
I went to college in Texas, and then when I got out of school, I was in the corporate world and did quite a bit of travel in sales and marketing. And from that adventure, I sort of went back to California and lived up in the mountains in a rural area outside of Los Angeles. So I got into the city, occasionally and for business, but tried not to be in the high density so much.
Hmm.
And from there, I moved to Hawaii, and that's where I met my wife. And we were there for 12 years. And from there, we moved to Virginia. She took a job supervising in a storage facility in the high density Virginia Beach area. So we were there for about a decade.
Mhm. Well, there are lots of similarities to our story branch. So, military background, I have that as well, and that's exactly how I would describe it as we got to, move around, live in diverse communities, that whole experience. The fact that you lived in Hawaii, I also lived in Hawaii as well. So I'm like, okay, we were definitely connecting on that. And then the fact that now we both live in Arkansas as well, it's like interesting. Okay, so with your career in the corporate, what did you do?
Well, I started out as a classroom teacher, and then I
Mhm.
became a middle school administrator. And then I left education and went into textbook sales. I actually worked for one of the large textbook publishing houses, and we sold textbooks to teachers. And that was my corporate experience primarily was in the publication and education fields of textbook sales and marketing.
Uh-huh. And so is that what you do now?
Oh no, no, that was in a past life. Now I'm an author. I write fiction and nonfiction books. Um, I've written 22 different books, some for the Christian market and the seekers and searchers market for spiritual belief systems, and then a lot of short stories and poetry for the secular market.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so when I was just like shuffling the cards, the whole sun came out, and so with the picture I'm noticing here is like the publisher and the writing in papers, and then the sun immediately was the Hawaii because that was the theme of that, and then there's this kid back here in the background, like the past life that you had with the whole education, and all that. So, and it says like you pretty much had good time, joy, success in your life. So tell me about a time that you found challenging in your career journey.
Well, like a lot of people, who embrace the ways of the world, I had a lot of success in the corporate sales and marketing field.
Mm-hmm.
And it consumed a lot of my time and energy.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime you start climbing that corporate ladder, yeah, the time and
Mm-hmm.
energy is devoted, in that arena at the expense of uh, anything else in your life. And so, although it was a successful career, it was not really a fulfilling career. And as a result, um, I I lost everything basically. I lost my family. I lost my house. I ended up homeless. Um, so I went from very high to very low. And for about 15 years, I was on this sort of 7 years in Tibet kind of an experience, trying to self discover, who I was, what I'm trying to do, who I'm trying to be, and the conflict between that success of the world and what else is there. So, after a decade or so of success in the corporate world, I spent a decade at the other end of the spectrum. And like I say, I was homeless and broke and had lost my family and, had hit rock bottom pretty much. And
Mm.
from there, I started studying different belief systems and Eastern mysticism and Eastern religions and that kind of thing. And it set me on a track or on a purpose of trying to find, truth and what that looked like for me in my life. So that was my turning point. And from there, then I got back on track. And after about a decade of searching and wondering and discovering, I sat down and started writing. And that was about 2 decades ago.
Mm.
So that's where the authorship venture came to pass.
This card is now making more and more sense because I'm like, basically, like this is you. Like I said, now you have this whole writing in public, and then you have this fireside over here um that yeah, it's like in your hand, it could burn you and be dangerous at the same time, but it's also a light. And then, like you said, we were talking about the time, but then I thought, okay, as you were sharing your story, that at some point you hit like this brick wall, like I said, talking about homelessness and all of that. But now it's like that's all a part of your story. You're floating upon that. Like you said, you went on this whole enlightenment kind of journey to learn more about yourself. Because the other card that had came out was connected with the ego. But then, as you can see, there was a time that she thought, so she that I was chained, I was not able to see, but then you were broken free, from all of that. So it's like, okay, I'm following along with that. So Tell me about that moment where, like you said, you're at your rock bottom. What was the instance where you said, I'm ready to ascend back up? Like, I am ready to release homelessness. I'm ready to release all of this struggle. What was it, that precipitous moment that was like, this is going to be different? Tell me about that.
Sure, I was living outside of the law,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, subsequently got arrested and was facing 99 years in prison.
Wow, the
And
freedom from the chains. Okay. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that when the door slammed on the cell, I knew at that moment that my life, needed to go in a completely different direction than it had been, and that was sort of my awakening moment. Um, as things worked out, the case against me was dropped after several months, and I was free again. But by that experience, I had decided to change paths, to change courses in my life, and become a different person than I had been. Uh, that ended me up, facing that kind of a confinement, long-term confinement. So that was a changing moment for me. Obviously, I was at rock bottom, and I managed to survive that situation. So I began back at, basically square one, ground zero, and started to rebuild my life, um, in a different path with different grounding as, my compass or my direction.
It, yeah, I'm like, literally, that displays that, because then it says the illusion of being trapped, accepting responsibility for your situation, and then make choices. And it's like, that's
Yeah.
literally what you did. You accepted the situation, and it was like you got this grace to come in and didn't have to do that. But then it says, um the support to, the path to happiness that you're, sounds like you're on now. It talks about addictions or unhealthy habits at that time. But so, okay, so wow. So you're transitioning from that, and you're now where you are. What encouragement would you give someone in the experience that you were in, similar to that? Like, what words of encouragement would you give?
Wow, what a great question. We all face challenges and struggle in our lives, in our daily lives. No one is immune to things not going well or not going right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, what a lot of people discover and a lot of people miss is that every choice that we make has consequences, and some of those consequences, can be substantial and life changing. And when we strive so much for fulfillment, oftentimes we get to where that place where we're trying to get that square peg in a round hole, and we
Mm-hmm.
think that, well, all we need is a bigger hammer, right? And we keep pounding away trying to make it happen because that's what we want. And the reality is, if there's a red flag there and I'm not paying attention to it, then I'm missing forewarning
That red flag.
of,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, of of a consequence that's not in my best interest. So I think, the biggest growth moment for me in that, coming out of that struggle, was realizing that every choice I make is going to have a consequence. And, can I reflect back on my past experiences to transfer that consequence to my now choice or decision? We repeat a lot of choices in our life, hoping that it will be better or different this time. And the
Mm-hmm.
reality is, if it's not a good choice, if it's not in my best interest, then there's a good chance that the consequence is also not going to be in my best interest. So growth is about realizing that perhaps I need to, make a different choice, take a different path, rather than trying to force, the same consequence with a different reality that I want, when
Mm-hmm.
that reality, isn't in my best interest. It's all about choice and consequence. And that's what I've learned. And that's where growth seems to come from, is realizing, you know, the consequence can be good, bad, or ugly. So I have to
Yes.
determine, can I determine before going through the process, can I sidestep that adversity? And if we're growing, then we see that reality and we can make a different choice. If we refuse to, and we just trying to keep putting that square peg in the round hole, then there's a good chance that consequence is going to be a negative outcome.
So again, you're using the terminology right back to that car when you're talking about the red flag. It's like, yeah, noticing
Yeah.
those things that are in your situation. Then I was also called to go to the us being in the natural state, and there's lots of animals here. So I was called to go to the spirit animals, and I got the message about the otter as you were sharing that story, and it's talking about surrender and letting go of control, and it says letting go of control doesn't mean giving up. Giving up means throwing up your hands up in the air in admission of defeat. Instead, true surrender means releasing any attempts to force your agenda on life. It means opening your hands and heart and accepting the direction of spirit. In that acceptance, you will become the will of spirit, and life flows much more easily through you and as you. And it talks about additional meaning, talks about sensuality, merging familyness and playfulness. So it's like, yeah, we have these incidences that happen into our life, but it doesn't mean, throwing up your hands and giving up, but really it was a surrender of like, yeah, I'm ready to break free, breaking these chains, with that. So that way I can, as you were saying, go forth and do, your work. Hands are up, but it's not in surrender. So that's like totally, amazing experience with that. So now that you're doing business and you're in the natural state and you're helping other authors, tell me about the client that you enjoy working with.
Wow. Well, I you know, that's a hard one to answer. I don't work directly with clients. My goal and my purpose in the
Mm-hmm.
writing is to enable and help readers go into that experience of self-reflection. I write
Mm-hmm.
about life situations that adults are familiar with, and in those story scenarios, there's always, a protagonist and an antagonist, but there's always a lesson to be learned. And as the reader goes through the story, hopefully it's designed that they can self-reflect and see themselves in the same situation. And then as the protagonist, comes out the other end, either successfully or unsuccessfully, the lesson that's to be learned, from the plot and the characters, the reader can then reflect, back to their own struggle, their own life situation. It's interesting, a lot of people tell me, oh, I read your book and I really liked some of the stories. I identified with them. And I
Mm-hmm.
really didn't like some of the other stories because I identified with them. And people say, well, you have such a mix of different stories. I have 52 stories in each book. And that's by design so that the reader can read one story a week finish the book in a year and have time to reflect on, what they've read. And so, because I deal with so many different adult issues, um,
Mm-hmm.
running the spectrum, they can always find a story that they identify with that's taking place in their own life or in the life of somebody, close to them or important to them. So that's the idea, is to, present a self-reflective story that will help the reader subsequently grow in their own situation. So if it, in terms of your question, then the reader is my client.
Okay. So what does 52? Why 52?
Well, there's 52 weeks in a year. And, I find that although the stories are very short or brief, um, the emotion and the situation that they deal with are sometimes pretty complex and pretty deep. So by allowing the reader to only have to, dedicate X amount of time to the story, it gives them lots of time to reflect and extrapolate. Did the story mean anything to me? What did it tell me? What did it help me see in my own life? It's just a contextual thing of trying to help people, uh, because it's not a novel. You can pick any story in any order, so it gives you some flexibility. Basically, 52 stories is one for each week.
Okay. Well, there is another meaning for you for 52. So I was like, okay. As you were talking about before, you're familiar with Psalms is one of the
Hmm.
books. And so I was like, okay, I was called to go to Psalms 52. And Psalms 52 is encourages individuals to read this chapter when suffering injustice. So it's like connected to the whole story. And so I want to wrap up with encouraging with what it says in Psalms 52. Why boastest thou thyself in mischief, O mighty man? The goodness of God endureth continually. Thy tongue is devilish mischief like a sharp razor working deceitfully. Thou lovest evil more than good, and lying rather than to speak righteousness. Selah. Thou lovest all devouring words, O thou deceitful tongue. God shall likewise destroy thee forever, and he shall take thee away and pluck thee out of thy dwelling place, and root thee out of the land of the living. Selah. The righteous also shall see and fear and shall laugh at him. Though this is the man that made not God his strength, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and strengthened himself in the wickedness. But I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever. I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it, and I will wait on thy name, for it is good before thy saints.
Amen.
Amen. Branch, thank you so much for connecting with me today and sharing your story and encouraging all those individuals watching us to live smart and ascend to new levels of success. Until we meet again
My
next week,
pleasure.
thank you.
Thank you so much.